Hello there. Today I've decanted a vintage port. The port in question is Quinta de Noval's 1985 vintage port. Sitting right at the heart of the Douro Valley, Quinta de Noval lies in Pinhão. The estate is first seen in records dating back to about 1715, but evidently it was originally given to a rather famous port family, the Rebelo Valente family, by no less a person than the Marquis de Pombal, the person who actually defined the port producing area to begin with. The estate, not surprisingly, has been through many ups and downs in the following 3 centuries. It was purchased in 1894 by Antonio José de Silva. He bought the estate just after it had been almost completely ravaged by phylloxera. I say almost because there's a very famous 6-acre plot, the Quinta de Noval Nacional, of pre-phylloxera vines that did actually survive the ravages of the phylloxera louse. So de Silva had to restore the property completely, replanted all the vineyards. Following in his footsteps, his son-in-law, Luis Vasconcelos Porto, did a lot of work to reconstruct the terraces of the old vineyards, to broaden them, trying to bring in a more modern form of agriculture. And this was one of many innovations that he adopted. In modern times, the estate made its name from the 1931 vintage, which is, along with the 63, one of 2 vintages of Noval Nacional, reckoned to be amongst the greatest wines ever produced. For most of the 20th century, the estate was owned by the Van Zeller family, another very historic port family, and they ran the estate for 5 generations. But unfortunately, in 1981, there was a catastrophic fire, and as a result of the cost of restoring the property following that, the estate ended up being sold. And in 1993, it was bought by the vineyard arm of a French insurance company, AXA. So the company that purchased it was AXA Millésime, and AXA have some very good investments in wines around the world. They're probably best known for their ownership of the Bordeaux second growth from Pauillac, Pichon Longueville Baron. But in Burgundy they also own Clos Lalo, and in Hungary they have the Tokaj house Tisznoko. So theirs is a very accomplished portfolio of premium producers, most of which were purchased at a time when they weren't achieving their full quality potential, and which AXA have been able to improve upon, thus adding value to the chateau. So they've been really good investments. When they purchased the property, and in the period from 1994, about 60% of the vineyards were replanted, new cellars were built, and so much work was done, and the reputation of the wines was fully restored. It would be fair to say that today the wines of Quinta de Noval would happily rank alongside the likes of wines from Taylor's, Fonseca or Graham's. So there's been quite a large quality change in the last 30 years or so. The vineyards here are steep sloped. They're a mixture of schist with a certain portion of clay in them, and the replanting work has ensured that predominantly planted in varietal plots and with high quality grape stock. So the varieties planted here are predominantly Touriga Nacional, of course, Touriga Franca, Tinta Roriz and Tinta. Having said that, this is a wine that was produced in 1985, so there might have been a much broader base of grape varieties seen in the vineyards at the time, and at that stage they would probably have been interplanted. Everything here is hand-picked. Given the nature of the terraces, that's not surprising. And fermentation and maceration would go on in a shallow stone lagar, quite a brief fermentation, and the foot treading, trying to extract as much colour, flavour and tannin from the skins of the grapes before draining off and fortifying the wine to retain sweetness. The wine then ages in large old oak for 18 months prior to bottling and release. Since then, obviously, this wine has spent over 36 years in bottle, slowly maturing, allowing the spirit to marry, hopefully, smoothing the tannins and creating some complexity in the aroma as the wine develops in the bottle. So let's see what we make of it, shall we? Firstly, the colour. The colour is a sort of a medium intensity. It seems quite a sort of a dark ruby colour. I'm not particularly seeing any fading at the rim, but there is only a sort of medium intensity of this ruby note. There's no real sign of sort of the wine starting to brown yet. So I think that's a good sign. Looking at it, the wine is fortified up to 20% alcohol. So unsurprisingly, there are some quite heavy tears forming very easily on the glass straight away. So let's see what make of the aroma, shall we? The aromas are actually surprisingly spirity. It doesn't stand out as being harsh, but there's a spirity note preceding some red fruit notes, the raspberry, boysenberry, red cherry, I suppose. They're quite ripe, and yet there is a sort of a mellowness to them that's sort of moving on almost to sort of a licoricey richness. And yet at the same time, towards the end, there are some sort of quite high-toned, delicate strawberry perfumes just emerging from that. So quite an attractive nose, not incredibly powerful, but at the same time not too reticent either. Let's have a taste, shall we? On the palate, the first impression is of sweetness. There's a rounded, almost sort of dried fruit, sort of just the first touches of dried fig, sultana notes, a little bit of raisin, and yet still a little bit of sort of red fruit flavour coming through at the end, maybe more sort of juicy boysenberry, delicate raspberry. The structure is lovely and supple, graininess that's giving a little bit of grip. There are hints of spiciness. There aren't oak flavours, been aged in large old oak, so that's not surprising. There does seem to be a little bit of spiritiness, and I think the point is that actually the fruit is relatively light, and it's just letting the alcohol show through. I mean, this was a stage prior to all the work that AXA did to revolutionise the quality of wines at this estate. So I think Quinta de Noval perhaps wasn't in the best of places, and this is, because of its age, quite approachable, elegant, certainly not the most concentrated, intense, rich wine that you'd get from what was a pretty good quality vintage. I'm sort of surprised that the colour isn't more developed, but actually the fruit on the palate is starting to get that bit more developed. It's sort of starting to move towards that sort of dried fig note that really lovely old vintage port gets. The flavours are not particularly long. The fruit is just about enough to balance the alcohol. The alcohol doesn't particularly stand out. It's not marring the fruit on the finish, but it's a wine that's mature, it's supple, it's relatively elegant, and probably would live for another 10-15 years. But it's not going to gain in weight, and so I think actually it's probably around its peak now. I wouldn't think that this is a wine that needed extra aging particularly. And at the same time, I am hoping it's going to provide some really enjoyable drinking over the next few days. So thank you very much for watching. I do hope you've enjoyed the tasting. If you have, do please press the like button. That would be fantastic. Maybe you'd like to share it with your friends. If you think they'd be interested, that would be great. Please also consider signing up and following us on YouTube. That would be fantastic to have your support. And we'd love to hear any comments you have, any feedback on the tastings we're doing, the wines we're trying, or anything else that's related to that. Would be fantastic. But more importantly, I do hope you'll take the time to join us for another tasting in the very near future. In the meantime, however, happy Christmas. Hopefully see you soon. Bye now.